Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It helps YouTube recommend more of my videos to you. Now let's begin. I was 19 when I finally moved into the college dorms. I had worked my ass off, saved money from summer jobs, late night shifts, and tutoring gigs just to afford tuition and a small dorm room. I thought I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one filled with freedom, education, and maybe even a little fun. I wish I could tell you everything was fine at first, like most stories usually go. But no, something felt off from day one. The very first time I walked into that room, I was hit with an odor so rancid I nearly gagged. It wasn't the normal college funk of unwashed laundry or stale pizza. No, this was something worse, like spoiled meat left out in the sun, mixed with burnt plastic. My new roommate stood in the corner, hunched over a microwave, stirring something in a plastic container. "Oh, sorry about the smell," he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. "It's an acquired taste." That taste lingered in the air for days, no matter how many times I cracked open the window. At first, I thought maybe he was just one of those weird but harmless people you come across in college. He mostly kept to himself, hardly ever leaving the room. But when he did speak, it was strange. He didn't talk like a normal 19-year-old. His words were overly formal, robotic, like he was reciting lines from a script. The first real conversation we had was about politics, religion, and philosophy. Topics I usually avoided with strangers. One thing led to another, and suddenly he was telling me things that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He said God was just a figment of people's imagination, that every human on earth was essentially God. He believed the world should be ruled like North Korea, total control, no freedom, no individuality. He said dating, love, even friendships were pointless because connection makes people weak. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just another bitter, atheist-type dude who thought he was smarter than everyone else. But the more he talked, the more it didn't feel like simple edginess. He had this conviction in his tone, like he was trying to plant the ideas in my head. And then he mentioned something that made me stop in my tracks. He told me he ran an organization. I asked what that meant, and he gave this vague answer about helping people, doing the FBI's work for them. He spoke about it like it was some kind of heroic vigilante group. At first, it didn't sound too bad, just some weird club maybe. But in the weeks that followed, I learned what it really was, and that's when everything spiraled out of control. By February, things started to get seriously unsettling. My roommate, the guy I thought was just weird, suddenly seemed dangerous. It started subtly. He disappeared for long stretches, sometimes returning late at night, eyes darting nervously, muttering to himself. He spent hours locked on his laptop, typing furiously on that loud mechanical keyboard that rattled the entire room, keeping me awake until 3 a.m. Even when I politely asked him to lower the volume, he brushed me off, blaming my screwed-up sleep schedule. Then came the real warning signs. One afternoon, campus security quietly whispered to me that my roommate had been called into the college office by actual FBI agents. Apparently, he was under investigation for posting threatening content online. That was bad enough, but then it happened a second time. Another summon, another tense interview with agents asking questions that seemed serious, almost like he was suspected of planning something major. The fear started to sink in. I realized this wasn't just some edgy kid with weird beliefs. Something about him set off real alarms in the authorities. I needed to know more. So I started digging. I asked around, tried to piece together what this organization of his really was, and that's when I saw it. A flyer pinned on a bulletin board, half hidden behind announcements for student clubs. The image made my stomach turn. People in white cloaks, masked faces staring out like soulless eyes, gathered around a strange four-sided symbol with an eye in the center. It looked like a twisted, cultish mix of occult iconography and authoritarian imagery, something out of a horror movie. The flyer read, "Join us," with a link to a website I refused to click, fearing what I might find. And then it hit me. That symbol, that mask, They were identical to the ones my roommate had in his room. The flag he proudly displayed in the corner, the creepy mask hanging on the wall like some grotesque decoration. The horrifying realization hit me in waves. My roommate wasn't just weird or edgy. He was actively running a secretive, cult-like organization. I froze, staring at the flyer as my mind raced. Every late-night typing session, every cryptic comment about his organization, every strange ritualistic decoration suddenly made sense. And I realized that living in the same room as him was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. After realizing the truth about my roommate, life in that dorm room became a waking nightmare. The smell never went away, the late-night typing never stopped, and his obsessive behavior only seemed to grow more intense. Every clack of his mechanical keyboard at 3 a.m. felt like nails on a chalkboard, echoing through the room, keeping me trapped in a fog of exhaustion and fear. I tried talking to him, politely asking him to lower the volume or dim his laptop screen. Each time he dismissed me with that same eerie, formal tone, blaming me for being oversensitive or weak. There was no compromise, no acknowledgement, just cold indifference. It became obvious that arguing with him wasn't just fruitless, it was exhausting and frightening. But the real terror came when he started making vague threats, bragging about owning a machete. The casual way he mentioned it made my stomach churn. I didn't know if he was joking, exaggerating, or serious. But with the knowledge of his secretive organization and the cultish symbols around the room, every word felt loaded with danger. I reached my breaking point one night. I had spent weeks documenting his behavior, taking photographs of the flag, the mask, and the disturbing flyers that I secretly found online. I also recorded audio of his late-night typing and the strange noises he made. Strange chants, low murmurs, things that made my skin crawl. I had enough evidence to show that this wasn't just an annoying roommate, it was a threat. The next day I confronted the resident advisors, showing them everything I had collected. I refused to spend another night in that room. The look on their faces told me they finally understood the severity of the situation. They intervened immediately, making arrangements to move me to another room and handle the roommate according to campus policies. Even after I was safe, I couldn't shake the dread. I realized how close I had been to living under the same roof with someone who didn't just have strange beliefs, but who actively cultivated an obsessive, secretive organization with potentially dangerous members. The sense of relief was tempered by lingering horror. This wasn't just a bad roommate story, it was a glimpse into a real-life horror hidden behind the guise of dorm life. Once the resident advisors intervened, I was finally able to escape that nightmare dorm room. I was moved to a new room, far away from him, and the suffocating stench, the late-night typing, and the cultish symbols that had made my skin crawl. I thought I was safe, but the memory of living under the same roof as someone like that never fully left me. The campus handled the situation quietly, making sure the roommates' activities were investigated further, but no one shared specifics with the students. All I knew was that I had narrowly avoided a situation that could have become far worse. Living with someone obsessed with a secretive organization, who claimed authority over others and embraced dangerous ideologies, had been terrifying in ways I could never have imagined. Even months later, I replayed every interaction in my mind, the formal, robotic speech, the casual discussions about God and power, the unsettling pride with which he displayed his symbols. It was surreal to think that behind the mundane facade of a college dorm, someone could be cultivating something so dangerous and secretive. The lesson I learned was hard and clear. Never underestimate the person you share a living space with. Dorms are supposed to be places of safety, learning, and growth. But sometimes, the real horror is the person in the room beside you. I will never, ever share a room with a stranger again. And if you ever find yourself assigned a roommate, pay attention to the warning signs. Sometimes the danger isn't obvious, and sometimes the person across the room is far darker than you could ever imagine. It was around midnight when I decided to take a quick shower before bed. The dorm was quiet, most students already asleep, and my floor, entirely women, was unusually still. Our community shower room held 6 or 8 stalls, arranged along the walls with a couple flanking the entrance. I had used it plenty of times before, and normally it felt routine, almost comforting in its familiarity. Tonight, though, something felt off. I chose the shower all the way to the right along the main wall. No one else was there, which wasn't uncommon at this hour, and the warm water felt soothing against my skin. I hung my shower bag on the hook, reached for my shampoo, and tried to let my mind unwind. But as I peeked out of the curtain, I froze. Across the room, on the farthest shower along the wall, a bathrobe hung neatly as if someone had just stepped out, or worse, was standing behind it. My brain screamed that someone had entered quietly, but I hadn't heard a single creak of the door, a step on the wet tiles, nothing. My shower muffled sound, sure, but even then, the room had been silent. I rationalized it. Maybe it was another girl taking a shower, and I hadn't noticed. Or maybe someone moved the robe and forgot it. My heart still thudded a little faster, but I let the tension roll off and focused on washing my hair. Little did I know, this was the beginning of a night that would blur the line between reality and something terrifyingly impossible. As I reached for my conditioner, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The bathrobe I had seen hanging across the room had moved, one shower over. My first thought was that I had imagined it, or maybe the person had quietly shifted spots because the original shower didn't work properly. I told myself it made sense. These things happen, but my unease lingered. I tried to focus on my shower, letting the warm water soothe my nerves, but my eyes kept flicking toward the robe. Then I saw it again. The curtain that had been drawn now stood slightly open, revealing a glimmer of something behind it. I froze, gripping my shampoo bottle a little too tightly. The movement had been silent, almost impossibly so. No rustling of the bathrobe fabric, no squelch of wet feet on the tile. Nothing. Curiosity and dread pulled me closer. I leaned down to peer under the partition between my shower and the one next to mine. Water trickled along the shared drain, tiny rivulets that suggested someone was standing there. And then I saw them. Feet. Small, unremarkable at first glance, but startling because they weren't wearing shower shoes like mine. I blinked, thinking maybe I had misjudged the shadows, or my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked back, the bathrobe had moved again. This time, the shower it had originally occupied had its curtain open, as if inviting me to look. My heart pounded. How could a person move so silently, so quickly, without me hearing anything? Something about the stillness of the room, the repetitive movement of the bathrobe, and the untraceable presence behind the curtain made me freeze in place. Rational explanations felt increasingly impossible. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet a part of me couldn't look away. That's when I noticed it, the tiniest, most unsettling detail that made my blood run cold. I forced myself to take a deep breath and focus. The feet under the partition, what little I could see, were unnervingly smooth. At first, I told myself it was just the angle, the water softening the skin. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. A few of the toenails were wrong, backwards, as if the white tips had been jammed under the skin in some hurried, unnatural way. My pulse jumped, and a cold dread snaked down my spine. I glanced up toward the bathrobe again. My eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. The curtain that had been closed a moment ago was now open, and the robe had somehow moved closer to me, without a sound, without a single drop of water squelching across the floor. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the water, a reflection, some weird angle. But the feet beneath the partition told a different story. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body felt frozen. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, adrenaline mixing with pure, unreasoning fear. What kind of person or thing could move like that? How could it appear and disappear in seconds, silently, in a room with tiles slick from shower water? I gathered my courage and started to pack my things, keeping my eyes locked on the feet. Every time I blinked, I feared the figure would shift again, closer, faster, impossibly precise. It was like watching something that shouldn't exist operate according to its own rules. ignoring every law of reality I knew. Then a horrifying thought hit me. If I had stayed in the shower just a few moments longer, what would have happened? Would the robe have teleported into my stall? Would those backward toenails have been right under my eyes, inches away, as if mocking my disbelief? I decided I had no choice. Clutching my towel and shower bag, I bolted for the door, barely taking a breath, my eyes fixed on the closing curtain in the shifting bathrobe. Every second felt stretched, every movement around me warped by fear. By the time I reached the door, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely turn the handle. I knew with a chilling certainty that whatever was in that shower room was far stranger and far more dangerous than anything I had ever encountered. I barely had time to process the unnatural detail of the feat before everything escalated. The bathrobe that had been across the room, seemingly in one stall, was now inches from me, positioned next to the shower I had just used. My heart lurched. My brain screamed that it was impossible, that no human could move that fast, silently, and with such precision. But there it was, standing, or hovering, I couldn't tell, in a way that defied reason. I grabbed my shower bag and clutched my towel to my chest, but my eyes couldn't leave the movement. The curtain that had been closed moments ago now hung open again, and the small trickle of water under the partition suggested the figure was still there. I was frozen, my body caught between the urge to flee and the horror of witnessing something I couldn't explain. And then I noticed the feet again, backwards toenails, unnaturally smooth skin, almost inhuman. My stomach dropped. A shiver ran through me, cold and merciless, as I realized that whatever was behind that curtain wasn't just playing a prank. This was something else, something wrong, something that could not exist or should not. I forced myself to move. My legs felt like lead, but I packed up my things as quickly as possible, keeping my eyes locked on the closed shower curtain and the shifting bathrobe. Every time I blinked or looked away, my imagination filled in the worst possibilities. The robe appearing in my own stall, the feet inches from mine, something reaching for me. Finally, I bolted. I threw open the door to the hallway, shoving it behind me, and ran down the painfully long corridor back to my room. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely unlock the door. My roommate, thankfully asleep, didn't stir as I slammed the door and leaned against it, gasping for air, my chest tight with fear and disbelief. Even as I sat in the safety of my room, wrapped in a blanket, my mind refused to calm. How could a person or anything move that fast, that silently, that unnaturally? How had it shifted positions in the blink of an eye, appearing and disappearing in a matter of seconds? I couldn't stop thinking about those feet, the backward toenails, the impossible movements, and I knew deep down that I would never feel safe in that shower again. Back in the safety of my dorm room, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it all. Maybe the water reflections, the shadows, and my exhaustion had played tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. The unnaturally smooth feet, the backward toenails, the impossible movements of that bathrobe. No rational explanation could account for it. I haven't returned to the shower since that night. Every time I think about it, my skin crawls, and I can feel the cold knot of fear tightening in my chest. I replay the movements in my head, the way the bathrobe appeared to shift positions instantly, the silent steps across wet tiles, the impossible precision. It's a memory that won't fade, a lingering terror that twists normality into something uncanny. Even mundane sounds, the splash of water, the scrape of tiles, now set my nerves on edge. The dorm showers, once a routine part of my nightly life, have become a place of dread. I keep telling myself it was a hallucination, a trick of tiredness and darkness. But a part of me refuses to believe that. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed in the shower just a few seconds longer. Would it have appeared right in front of me? Would those backward toenails have been inches from my eyes? The thought alone is enough to make my blood run cold. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I will never, ever take that shower again. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was might still be out there, waiting. It was just after 7 in the morning when the pounding on my door jolted me awake. At first I thought it was a fire drill, the kind of irritating routine every dorm student comes to hate. But when I stumbled into the hallway, bleary-eyed and still half asleep, the sight that greeted me was anything but routine. Men in full hazmat suits stormed the hallways, their voices muffled through respirators as they barked orders for us to evacuate immediately. Thick gloves, sealed helmets, and bright reflective tape caught the dim light of the corridor as they moved with military precision. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a drill. Something was very, very wrong. Students poured out of their rooms, some clutching blankets, others barefoot and shivering. None of us knew what was happening. Was it a chemical spill, a gas leak, or worse, the kind of biological attack that had been dominating the news for weeks? You have to remember, this was 2001. The fear of terrorism was fresh and raw. Anthrax-laced letters were being delivered across North America, and every day seemed to bring a new warning on the evening news. In that moment, standing shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of equally terrified students, I was convinced we were part of the next breaking headline. And the truth, as I'd later learn, was both far more absurd and far more disturbing than I could have imagined. The night before had been like countless others in the dorm. Loud, restless, and drenched in the usual mix of cheap beer and bad decisions. It was well past midnight when I finally made it back to my room. The halls still buzzed with music leaking from cracked doors, laughter echoing, and the occasional slam of someone stumbling back from a party. Nothing about it seemed unusual. But then my roommate staggered in. He reeked of alcohol, eyes glassy and unfocused, and in his hands he was clutching something that immediately caught my attention, a fire extinguisher. At first I laughed. It wasn't rare for people to do stupid things while drunk. And in the chaos of dorm life, grabbing random items wasn't out of the ordinary. But then he pressed the nozzle and let loose a loud hiss of white foam in the hallway, spraying it like he was putting out an invisible fire. The air filled with a sharp chemical tang, almost metallic, and a thin mist lingered in the fluorescent light. I remember wrinkling my nose at the smell. The foam clung to the carpet, smeared across the elevator doors, and settled in powdery streaks along the walls. By the time he stumbled back into our room, extinguisher still in hand, I had already shrugged it off as another ridiculous story I'd tell later. Just one more prank, one more late-night mess. What I didn't know then was how terrifyingly wrong things would go the next morning. In the post-9/11 climate, paranoia was like a live wire running through everything. And that harmless, drunken stunt, the extinguisher, the foam, the powder, was about to be mistaken for something much darker. At exactly 7 in the morning, I was pulled from sleep by pounding on doors and urgent shouts echoing down the hallway. At first it felt like a drill, but the panic in people's voices told me this was something else. When I opened the door, the scene was surreal. Firefighters and police officers in full hazmat suits rushed past, their boots thudding against the tile, visors reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Students were herded into the hallway, many of them in pajamas, some barefoot, others clutching whatever blanket or jacket they could grab in their confusion. No one knew what was happening. Whispers flew from one panicked face to another. Is it a gas leak? Did someone set off a bomb? But the most chilling rumor spread like wildfire. Someone had found a strange white powder in the elevator. That word, Warstassen powder, was enough to send shivers through everyone. This was 2001, and anthrax attacks had dominated the news for weeks. Every cough, every sealed envelope on a desk had suddenly become a potential weapon. And now in our dorm, the sight of some unknown substance was enough to set an entire building on edge. We were ordered outside and lined up in groups. The September air bit into my skin, and I remember shivering as I watched bus after bus roll up to the curb. We were loaded on board, nearly 400 students in total, and driven across campus under strict instructions not to talk, not to touch anything, not to panic. The buses pulled up to the university cafeteria, which had been hastily converted into a quarantine zone. The doors locked behind us. Soldiers and police ringed the building. Inside, the atmosphere grew heavier by the minute. We were trapped. No explanations, no timeline. Nothing but the knowledge that we might have been exposed to something deadly. One by one, officers began pulling students aside for questioning. The rest of us sat in silence, the low hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the murmurs of terrified speculation. The air tasted stale, and the fear was palpable, spreading faster than any toxin. By that point, I was convinced that this was real, that we were part of a biological attack. And it wasn't until hours later, sitting in that cafeteria with hundreds of other terrified students, that the pieces of the puzzle began to click together in my mind. Time moved strangely in that cafeteria. Minutes dragged like hours. The police worked methodically, pulling students aside one by one, asking where they had been, what they had touched, what they had seen. Nobody was giving us answers, but every new rumor tightened the noose of fear. I sat hunched over at one of the long tables, staring at my hands as if expecting to see them blister or turn pale. The word anthrax kept circling in my head like a drumbeat. I remember the news clips, envelopes sent to government buildings, reporters showing hazmat crews collecting tiny samples of powder that had already killed people. Was that what we were dealing with? And then, in a single jarring flash of memory, I saw my roommate from the night before. Drunk, laughing, waving that fire extinguisher like a trophy. I saw the mist, the white streaks in the hallway, the powder dusting the elevator doors. My chest tightened. Could it really be that simple? That stupid? Could 400 students be quarantined? Could soldiers and police be mobilized? Could hazmat crews swarm our dorm? All because of a drunken prank? The thought horrified me. If I was wrong and it really was anthrax, I'd be making a fool of myself. Or worse, distracting investigators from the truth. But if I was right, then hours of fear and chaos were all for nothing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked to speak with one of the officers and haltingly explained what I had seen. My roommate stumbling in, the extinguisher, the foam, the powdery residue. The officer didn't react much, just scribbled notes and left. An hour later, the truth came crashing down. They had gone to our room and found him, still unconscious in bed, snoring loudly, one arm draped protectively around the empty fire extinguisher, as if it were a teddy bear. That image spread quickly through the investigation team. The supposed anthrax attack was nothing more than a night of drinking and a poorly timed prank. But in that moment, as relief rippled through the cafeteria, I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. A joke had spiraled into hysteria, and for a few terrifying hours, every single one of us had truly believed we were living through a nightmare. By the time the truth was confirmed, the damage had already been done. The Army Biological Warfare Response Team had been alerted and was en route before the call was canceled. Hours of manpower, emergency protocols, and sheer terror had been triggered by one drunk student with a fire extinguisher. When the cafeteria doors finally opened, we were herded out into the sunlight, dazed and exhausted. Some students laughed nervously, trying to shake off the fear. Others were furious, swearing under their breath at the stupidity of it all. But most of us were quiet, still processing what we had just been through. It was strange how quickly life snapped back into place. Classes resumed, professors lectured as though nothing had happened. But for those of us who lived in that dorm, the memory lingered. I could still see the reflective tape on the hazmat suits, still hear the clipped voices through respirators, still feel the dread of wondering if I had inhaled something lethal. The absurdity of the situation almost made it worse. Anthrax had dominated every headline. Fear was in the air already. And yet it hadn't been an act of terror that upended our lives that morning. It had been a prank, a stupid, reckless prank that revealed just how fragile our sense of safety really was. When I finally sat down in my sociology professor's office to explain why I had missed the midterm, I almost laughed at how surreal it sounded. Sorry, I was quarantined by the RCMP because my roommate emptied a fire extinguisher in the elevator. But behind the humor was a truth I couldn't shake. The realization that paranoia can spread faster than any toxin. And for those few hours in that locked cafeteria, the fear was absolutely real. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment with your favorite one, hit that like button, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.